You ever feel like you're just trying to wrap your head around everything happening in the world? It's like you figure one thing out and then bam, 5 more complex issues pop up.
Oh, absolutely. That feeling like you're drowning in information, it's pretty common, I think.
Yeah,
Especially with global stuff.
totally. Well, today we're going to zero in on one specific thing. We're doing a deep dive into a recent executive order. This was filed back in late January.
Right.
And it takes let's say a new angle on some major international groups. Cartels mainly, but other organizations too.
Exactly. And it's not the usual organized crime discussion.
Yeah.
This order actually talks about potentially designating these groups as foreign terrorist organizations.
FTOs.
Or especially designated global terrorists. So yeah, it's a pretty significant potential shift.
Okay, that definitely sounds like a big change from how these groups are normally handled. So for you listening, our mission here is to unpack this. We'll look right at the order itself, try to understand the why behind it, and figure out why it might actually matter to you, even if tracking cartels isn't your day job.
And like you said, we're basing this on the actual text of the executive order, straight from the source.
All right, let's jump in. First big question. What's the core reason? What's the main goal of this executive order?
Well, fundamentally, the order is about setting up a process to officially label certain international cartels and other similar groups as either FTOs, that's under the Immigration and Nationality Act,
Or the other one?
or specially designated global terrorists. That falls under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, and another older executive order about terror financing.
Okay, so specific legal boxes they might be put into, not just, calling them bad guys. What's the justification given for taking this step?
The main argument in the order is that these cartels, well, they pose a national security threat that really goes beyond what we typically think of as organized crime.
So elevating it, making it more than just a law enforcement problem.
Precisely. That reclassification or potential reclassification is really the heart of it.
Okay, so what specific reasons does the order give? How do they argue these groups cross that line into a national security threat?
It lays out a few key things. First, it talks about a convergence happening.
Convergence?
Yeah, between these cartels and what it calls extra-hemispheric actors. That includes groups already labeled as foreign terrorists and also antagonistic foreign governments.
Wait, so cartels possibly teaming up with terrorist groups or even hostile countries? That sounds concerning.
It does. And historically, that kind of overlap between crime and terrorism, it makes things really messy for counterterrorism efforts. Resources get stretched, focus gets blurred,
Yeah, I can see that. What else?
Second, the order says these cartels show characteristics of insurgency and asymmetric warfare. It calls them complex adaptive systems.
Okay, complex adaptive systems. What does that actually mean for, the average person trying to understand this?
Think of it like this. They're incredibly flexible. They can change their tactics, their structure, really fast when they face pressure, like an insurgency adapting to military action.
Okay, so not like a rigid top-down company, more like something that can shift and morph constantly.
Exactly. It makes them really hard to dismantle using traditional methods.
Right.
It's like fighting smoke sometimes, they just reorganize.
Right, like the Hydra analogy, cut off one head.
Sort of, yeah. They adapt very quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, so the third big point the order makes.
What's number 3?
It alleges they've infiltrated foreign governments across the Western Hemisphere.
Infiltrated governments? How?
Through, well, violence and terror, essentially destabilizing countries that the order says are important to U.S. interests.
And the fallout from that instability. It doesn't just stay there, does it, according to the order?
No, that's the point. The order claims this leads directly to the U.S. being flooded with deadly drugs, violent criminals, and dangerous gangs.
Okay.
And it makes a really strong claim here that these cartels basically control almost all illegal traffic coming across the southern U.S. border.
Wow, control it through violence.
Through violence and terror, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the assertion. And it adds that in some parts of Mexico, they even act like quasi-governments, like they're the ones in charge.
Okay, that paints a very different picture than just drug smuggling.
Absolutely. So the conclusion drawn to the order is that all these things combined, their proximity, their actions spilling into the U.S. pose an unacceptable national security risk.
So the whole framing has shifted. It's national security, regional stability, not just crime fighting. Now, it mentions international cartels generally, but does it name names?
It does. Besides the general term cartels, it specifically calls out other transnational organizations. It names Tren de Aragua TDA, and La Mara Salvatrucha,
MS-13.
better known as MS-13, yeah.
And why single them out? Are they seen as being in the same league threat-wise?
The order says they pose similar threats. It describes their activities as extraordinarily violent and vicious, destabilizing the hemisphere in similar ways.
Okay, so we've got the why, the rationale. Let's shift to the what. What does it actually mean if these groups get one of these designations? FTO or SDGT?
Right. The order itself doesn't spell out all the legal consequences in detail, but these aren't new labels. They come with existing legal framework.
Frameworks with teeth, presumably.
Oh, yeah. Being named an FTO under the Immigration and Nationality Act, for example, that can trigger really serious stuff, like freezing assets, travel bans, making it illegal for anyone to provide them material support.
Okay.
And similarly, the SDGT designation under IEPA, that also involves major financial sanctions, blocking transactions, cutting them off from the U.S. financial system.
So it's not just symbolic. It gives the government tools to hit them where it hurts, financially and legally. What's the ultimate policy goal stated?
The order's pretty blunt about it. It states the goal is the total elimination of their presence in the U.S.
Total elimination.
And destroying their ability to threaten the U.S., its territory, its safety, even from their extraterritorial command and control structures.
So dismantle them completely, even the parts operating outside the U.S.? How is this supposed to happen? What are the next steps the order actually requires?
It sets out a couple of immediate actions in the implementation section, within 14 days of the order being issued back in January.
Pretty quick timeline.
Yeah. First, the Secretary of State, working with Treasury, Homeland Security, the Attorney General, Director of National Intelligence, basically all the key players, has to come up with recommendations for who should be designated.
Okay, so identify the specific groups for these labels. What else?
Also within that 14 days, the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security, again consulting with state, they need to prepare for potentially using the Alien Enemies Act.
The Alien Enemies Act? That sounds old and serious.
It is. It dates back to 1798. It's usually associated with wartime, allowing the government to detain or remove citizens of a hostile nation found within the U.S.
And they're told to prep for using that against members of these groups.
The order mentions preparing for its potential use regarding qualifying invasions or predatory incursions by a qualifying actor. And alongside that, they need to get facilities ready for expedited removal of people who might fall under these designations.
Wow. Invoking the Alien Enemies Act, even just preparing for it, that signals they're thinking about some very powerful tools here.
It definitely suggests a very high level of perceived threat.
Okay, so that covers the what, the labels, the goal, the initial steps. Now, let's talk about the so what. Why should someone, say, in their 20s, 30s, 40s, juggling work, maybe family, why should this executive order be on their radar? How is it relevant?
Yeah, that's fair. It might seem distant, right? But these organizations, their activities, they can ripple outwards in ways that affect everyday life. Think about illicit drugs, the availability, the price, the problems that come with them. Addiction, crime, public health crises. These cartels are central players in that whole ecosystem. Actions against them could potentially impact those things right here in our communities.
Right, so it's not just abstract foreign policy. It could connect to things like community safety, public health resources, things people in that age group definitely care about. What else?
Well, border security and immigration are huge topics, obviously.
Very relevant.
And this order explicitly links these groups to controlling illegal border traffic.
Yeah.
So if the U.S. approach shifts dramatically because of these designations, that could easily lead to changes in border policy, resource allocation, things with wide social and economic effects.
And bigger picture, this sends a message about U.S. priorities in Latin America.
Absolutely. Labeling these groups as terrorists could reshape diplomatic relationships, law enforcement cooperation, maybe even military posture in the region.
It's a strong signal.
And the order itself declares a national emergency under IEPA to deal with this threat. That's not something done lightly. It underlines just how seriously the government views this situation.
Plus, the order mentions these groups operate inside the U.S. too, not just outside.
Right. It explicitly says within and outside the United States. So designation could trigger more domestic law enforcement actions too, affecting safety right here.
Okay. Before we wrap up, are there any important caveats, any fine print in the order we should know about?
Yeah, a couple of standard but important points. First, it says this order doesn't take away any existing legal powers from government agencies. It's meant to add tools, not replace existing ones.
So it works alongside current efforts.
Exactly. And second, putting it into practice depends on applicable law and availability of appropriations, meaning it's subject to legal constraints and whether Congress actually funds the efforts. Money matters.
Budgets always matter. And crucially, for anyone listening, does this order give individuals any new rights? Can someone sue based on this?
No, it's very clear on that.
Yep.
It explicitly states it doesn't create any legally enforceable rights or benefits for anyone against the U.S. government. It's an internal directive for the government itself.
Got it. Standard procedure for these kinds of orders. Okay, so let's try to pull this together. This executive order is basically setting the stage to potentially label major international cartels and groups like TDA and MS-13 as terrorist organizations.
Right.
The reason given is that their actions go beyond typical crime. They're seen as a national security threat because of links to hostile actors, their adaptable nature, their influence in other countries, and their direct impact on the U.S. via drugs, violence, and border issues.
And it kicks off a process for using existing anti-terrorism laws against them, aiming ultimately to completely dismantle their operations and threat to the U.S.
It definitely signals a potential major shift in strategy.
It certainly seems intended that way, yes.
Yeah.
A potentially much more aggressive posture.
So, as you, our listener, are thinking about all this, maybe chew on this, what could be the long-term ripple effects, the unintended consequences maybe, of using terrorism laws against these kinds of criminal groups?
Yeah, that's a big question. How does this change the global fight against transnational crime? Does it work? Does it create new problems?
And thinking about how interconnected everything is, how might focusing this way on the Western Hemisphere end up affecting other global hotspots or international relations down the line?
Lots to consider there. It's definitely not a simple issue with easy answers.
Definitely not. Just some food for thought as you navigate this complex world we're all trying to understand.